The desert stretched endlessly, a barren sea of dust and broken dreams. The wind blew cruel and dry, whispering secrets through skeletal sagebrush. The sun had already begun its daily act of punishment, beating the land until it cracked like old porcelain. In the middle of it all, perched like a coffin in a furnace, stood a lonely log cabin, forgotten, sun-bleached, and silent but for the smoke leaking from its seams. Inside, the air was thick with it. Black curls of smoke slithered along the rafters. The fire had started from the floorboards, fed by kerosene spilled deliberately in the corners. Heat shimmered, rising like ghosts off the walls. She lay on the splintered floor, shackled to the iron leg of a bed frame. Her wrists bled against rusted manacles. Her name was Elsie May. 19. Skin the color of old cream and eyes that once held springtime, now dulled by pain. Her belly was round, taut, the child inside her restless, reacting to the smoke with a furious kick. Her dress was torn, stained, ash-covered. She coughed hard, trying to shield her face from the suffocating air. Beside her, her 5-year-old son Caleb whimpered, cheeks streaked with soot and tears. He gripped her with tiny fingers, as though he could anchor her to life. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Mama, the fire, it's coming!" "I know, baby," she rasped, brushing his hair back with trembling fingers. "Close your eyes. We gotta wait a little longer." "For who?" She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because there was no answer. No one knew they were there. No one was coming. Her stepbrothers had made sure of that. Hours earlier, they'd dragged her through the desert like a sack of grain. They spat venom, eyes wild with that righteous hate that only family can wield. She was a disgrace, they said. Unclean. A whore twice over. They didn't care that her first marriage ended in death. They didn't care that her second pregnancy was not by choice. All they saw was shame. And in their minds, shame was a fire that needed to be cleansed by another fire. So they chained her to that old family cabin, doused the place in oil, and lit the edges. Left laughing. "Mama," Caleb said again, voice nearly swallowed by the rising roar of flames. She turned her face toward him and forced a smile, lips cracked and dry. "We sing now, all right? Just like before. Sing with Mama." Her voice trembled but carried. A lullaby her own mother once sang during storms. Her breath rattled in her chest with every word, but still, she sang. Miles away, a lone figure rode across the flats. Dust trailed behind the horse like a wounded banner. The rider wore a broad hat, and a duster coated in road grime. A rifle was slung across his saddle, a coil of rope, a canteen. Every inch of him spoke of solitude, the kind you don't choose, just end up with. His name was Wyatt Holt. The wind shifted, carried a dark, bitter scent that made his horse snort and paw the earth. He narrowed his eyes toward the distant horizon. Smoke. Fresh. He turned his mount, spurred forward. Wyatt had no intention of being anyone's savior. He was tracking horse thieves, following prints and gut feelings. He hadn't planned to detour. But something twisted in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't had in years. Not since that night his wife and daughter were taken while he rode out for grain and came back with guilt instead. He'd buried them beneath a cottonwood tree near the Pecos River. Since then, he'd spoken to few, trusted fewer, and kept moving like motion alone could redeem a man. As he crested the ridge, the full horror came into view. The cabin was half consumed, flames licking the roof beams. No signs of life outside. But something held him, made him listen. Then he heard it, a faint cry, not of a grown man or beast, but a child. A scream muffled by wood and fire. Wyatt kicked his horse hard. He leapt off before the beast fully stopped, drawing a handkerchief over his mouth and storming through the flames. The door was already warped, hinges glowing orange. He kicked it in with all his strength. Inside, smoke enveloped him. He stumbled, blinking through stinging eyes, until he heard the chain rattle. There they were. A boy, holding a woman, no, a girl. Young. Pregnant. Barely conscious. He dropped to his knees, slashed the chain with his hunting knife. The lynx resisted, then broke with a spark. The boy clung to his neck. The woman, Elsie, tried to rise but collapsed into his arms. I got you, he muttered. Hold on. He didn't wait. He carried her out, the child still gripping his side. Behind them, the roof groaned. Then collapsed in a storm of cinders. He rode hard for an hour, pushing the horse past its limits, stopping only when the sun began to dip behind ragged cliffs. There, in a shallow drawn nestled under red rock, he dismounted and gently laid the woman and child on his saddle blanket. He fetched water from his canteen, trickled it between her cracked lips. Her eyelids fluttered, and she moaned softly. You're all right, he said, voice low, more graveled in tone. You're safe now. She opened her eyes and stared at him, really looked. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense. His face was marked by sun and time, a constellation of scars and stubble. But his eyes, they were steady. And tired. Like a man who'd seen too much but still chose to carry it. Her lips parted. Who are you? Wyatt Holt, he said. Cowhand. Tracker. A beat. Just passing through. She turned her head toward the darkening sky. You came, she whispered. You actually came. Seemed like someone oughta. She closed her eyes again. A tear slipped down her cheek. Caleb had curled beside her, fingers still curled into her dress. Wyatt crouched nearby, feeding dried mesquite to a small fire. He didn't speak for a while, just watched the flames twist in silence. I don't got much, he said finally. But you're safe for now. Tomorrow, we'll figure the rest. Elsie stirred, then nodded faintly. In the silence that followed, the desert cooled, wind sighing against stone. The stars blinked awake, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang. Caleb, already asleep, turned in his sleep and pulled closer to Wyatt's worn coat. The cowboy didn't move, didn't speak. But something flickered behind his eyes, something long buried. He'd saved a life. 2, maybe 3. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Morning came soft and gold over the jagged cliffs, brushing color into the world like a cautious artist. The desert was quiet, save for the brittle crunch of Wyatt's boots as he checked the perimeter. The fire had died down to embers, and the air was cool but already tinged with heat. He stood guard like a lone sentry, eyes scanning the ridgelines. Trouble had a way of circling back. He'd learned that long ago. Behind him, Elsie stirred beneath a woven blanket he'd carried in his saddlebag. Her face was pale, streaked with soot and sorrow. But her breathing was steady. Beside her, Caleb still slept, limbs sprawled across the makeshift bedding, one hand loosely wrapped around Wyatt's canteen like a security blanket. Wyatt crouched down, poured a little water into a tin cup, and offered it to Elsie as her eyes fluttered open. You're still here, she said hoarsely, voice sandpapered from smoke and despair. He didn't smile. Didn't see the sense in leaving. She pushed herself upright, wincing as pain twisted through her lower back and hips. The baby kicked again, strong and restless. You're close, Wyatt said, eyeing her belly. How many weeks? I don't rightly know. Last time I counted, the snow was melting in Sutter's Pass. That was months ago. He nodded. You need a doctor. Or a midwife at least. No towns around here would take me in, she said quietly. Not after what happened? Wyatt didn't ask what. He'd seen the chain marks. He'd seen the fire. He could fill in the rest. Caleb stirred and sat up, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Wyatt, he moved closer to his mother but didn't cry. Didn't ask questions. Just looked at the man with a curious quietness that said more than words could. You hungry? Wyatt asked. The boy nodded. He rummaged through his saddlebag and pulled out strips of dried venison, hard biscuits, and a tin of molasses. Caleb bit into the meat like he hadn't eaten in days. Elsie took hers slower, chewing each piece with silent reverence. Your kin that did this? Wyatt asked finally, breaking the stillness. Elsie nodded. Stepbrothers. When Pa died, they took everything. Said I brought shame. Said the baby made it worse. He watched her eyes go distant, but she didn't cry. Whatever tears she had were burned away in that cabin. Wyatt poked at the embers, then looked up. You have a place you were trying to reach? She shook her head. Just away. I tried heading for Nevada, heard they let women file homesteads alone there. But I got caught along the way. Wyatt ran a hand through his dust-caked hair. There's a settlement 3 days west, near Salt River. Quiet folk. I know a widow there, named Ora. Used to be a nurse. She could help. Elsie eyed him warily. Why are you helping us? You don't even know me. He met her gaze without flinching. Don't need to know you. Just know what it's like to lose everything. The wind picked up, stirring sand along the edges of the camp. Wyatt stood and began packing the saddle, tying down gear with practiced efficiency. He moved like a man used to silence, his thoughts carried in the slump of his shoulders and the sharpness of his eyes. Elsie watched him for a long while. She didn't trust easily. But something in Wyatt's quiet steadiness calmed the tremor that had lived under her skin since the cabin burned. By midday, they were moving again. Wyatt walked beside his horse, letting Elsie ride with Caleb in front of her, one hand always on her belly. The boy giggled when the wind tugged at his hair, and for a brief moment, a hint of childhood returned to his voice. The trail west was harsh, narrow ledges over red rock, dry creek beds that promised water and gave none, a sun that baked every thought into dust. Elsie tried not to show her pain, but Wyatt noticed. He watched the way she gripped the saddle horn tighter with each mile. Her lips pressed in silence, her skin waxen under the sun. She was close, too close to birthing. At nightfall, they camped near a bluff, half sheltered by a rock overhang. Wyatt laid out the bedroll again, helped Elsie down from the saddle, then built a fire while Caleb curled up with the old blanket like it was a treasured toy. Elsie sat on a flat rock, breathing carefully. You said you had a daughter? He didn't answer at first. Then, without looking up, he said, She'd be 10 now. If she'd lived. Elsie lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. She and her mama died in a raid, he said. 5 years ago. I wasn't there. Went to get feed. Came back to ashes. That's not your fault, she said gently. Wyatt's jaw tensed. Maybe not. Still carries the weight. They sat in silence, firelight dancing between them. Caleb snored softly. The desert sighed around them, quiet, but never still. I thought no man would ever look at me again, Elsie said after a while, voice barely audible. Not without hate. Not after what I lost. Not with this baby coming. Wyatt looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he tossed another stick onto the fire. I ain't looking at you like that. She met his gaze, something fragile flickering between them. Then a sound, a dry branch cracking in the dark. Wyatt stood immediately, hand at his rifle. He scanned the brush beyond the firelight. Another crack. Then silence. Elsie held her breath, hand protectively over Caleb. Wyatt stepped out, careful not to make noise. A moment later he returned, rifle lowered. Coyote, he muttered. Just curious. He sat back down, but now his eyes never left the dark. Elsie leaned back against the saddle, exhaustion heavy. You think we'll make it to the river town? If we ride early and hard tomorrow, yes, Wyatt said. But if that baby comes before, we'll need to stop sooner. Elsie closed her eyes. It's like the world's trying to see if I'll break. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his coat and laid it gently over her shoulders. It smelled like horse, gunpowder, and weathered leather, but it was warm. She clutched it like armor. Wyatt sat beside her, not too close, but close enough. They didn't speak again that night. But something had shifted. There was a strange peace between them, two survivors sharing silence, two wounded souls finding a fragile sort of shelter. As the fire dwindled and the stars shimmered cold above, Wyatt glanced once more at Elsie. She was asleep now, arm curled around Caleb, his small hand resting on her stomach like a promise. The wind tugged gently at her hair. Wyatt turned his gaze outward to the desert, rifle across his lap, and kept watch. Not because he had to, but because, for the first time in years, he wanted to. Dawn rose red and restless, staining the desert horizon like a warning. Wyatt had them moving before the sun cleared the cliffs, the horse trudging forward with the weariness of too many miles. Elsie sat astride with Caleb nestled against her, both of them quiet. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and Wyatt could see it. Each jolt of the saddle was a battle. She was close. Closer than either of them could afford. The Salt River town was still a day's ride, maybe more. The terrain ahead would get worse before it got better: rocky gullies, dry ravines, and blistering flats. And all the while, Wyatt's gut coiled with unease. The air felt wrong. He kept his rifle tied close to the saddle and his eyes on the ridges. By mid-morning, Elsie was doubled forward, clutching her belly. Caleb gripped her sleeve, frightened but silent. Wyatt halted. "We stop here," he said. "I can go," she whispered, teeth clenched. "Just need a moment." "No, ma'am. That baby's not waiting. You ride any more, and you're gonna tear yourself apart." He led the horse into a rocky alcove just off the trail, shielded by brush and canyon wall. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The sun was unforgiving already, casting heat like a curse. Wyatt helped her down carefully. She leaned against the rock, sweat already glistening on her brow. He knelt beside her. "I've seen 3 foals born and helped a neighbor's wife when her man was off at war. I ain't no midwife, but I won't let you do this alone." Elsie gritted her teeth. "You already saved us once. I won't ask." "You didn't ask. I chose." She looked at him, fear in her eyes, but also something steadier beneath it, trust forged in fire and silence. Wyatt rolled out the blanket, laid her gently down, and gave Caleb a biscuit, sending him just far enough to stay busy gathering twigs. Then he turned back and saw the pain wash through Elsie like a storm wave. Her fingers dug into the earth. The hours passed like centuries. The sun rose higher, burning through shade and mercy. Wyatt wiped her brow with his shirt, whispered steadiness, braced her through every contraction. She screamed only once, when the worst came, and clutched his hand until her nails left crescent moons in his skin. Then, just as the light began to shift golden again, the baby arrived, red, crying, alive. A girl. Elsie sobbed as Wyatt wrapped the child in a corner of his coat. He handed her over, and for a moment, time stopped. There was nothing but the tremble in Elsie's breath and the fierce protectiveness in her arms. "She's perfect," she whispered. Wyatt sat back, exhausted but steady. "She's got lungs like a cavalry bugler." Caleb crept closer, wide-eyed. He looked at the baby, then up at Wyatt. "Is she ours now?" Wyatt blinked. "She's your sister." The boy nodded solemnly and sat beside his mother, laying a careful hand on the baby's leg. They stayed like that for a while, the 4 of them in the stillness, broken only by the baby's soft whimpers and the rustle of wind. But peace never lasted in the desert. Wyatt heard it first, the distant thud of hoofs. He rose instantly, hand to rifle, gaze locked to the trail beyond the bluff. Dust swirled up in the canyon mouth. 3 riders. No brandings. No care for subtlety. Elsie saw the shift in his stance and paled. "Them?" Wyatt nodded. "Could be your kin. Or worse. Either way, they ain't here to help." He moved fast, tucking the baby beside Elsie, placing a bowie knife in her reach. "You stay low. If anything happens to me, ride west until you see a white church steeple. Ask for Ora." She clutched his arm. "Don't. I came too far to let it end with a fire and ashes." The riders approached with the arrogance of men who think they've already won. Dust caked, rifles in plain view, eyes scanning like hawks. Wyatt stepped out from the bluff with the calm of a man born to face guns. "Turn around," he said, voice flat. "Ain't nothin' here but dirt and bad decisions." One of the men laughed. "Ain't you the cowboy from Dry Creek? Heard you been hidin' out with some stolen goods." The one in the center spat. "We come for the woman and the boy." Man paid good for her. You stand in the way, you ain't walking out. Wyatt didn't flinch. You won't touch her. They raised their rifles. He fired first. The canyon cracked with thunder. Wyatt dropped to one knee, shot once, twice. One rider fell off his horse with a scream. The second ducked, returned fire, but missed. The third rode in a wide arc, trying to flank. Wyatt rolled behind a boulder, breath sharp. He could hear Elsie whispering to Caleb behind him, soothing the baby with the same strength she'd summoned in labor. Another shot whizzed past his head. He counted the seconds, then popped up and fired again. The second man screamed, clutching his arm. The third closed in, gun drawn, ready to fire. Wyatt had one bullet left. He stood, aimed slow, and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The rider smirked and charged. Wyatt grabbed the rifle barrel and swung it like a club, knocking the man sideways off his horse. They tumbled in the dust, fists and elbows flying. The rider drew a knife, slashing across Wyatt's shoulder. Pain exploded, but Wyatt didn't yield. He slammed the man's head into the ground once, twice, until he stopped moving. He stood over the bodies, chest heaving, face bleeding, arms trembling, but alive. Elsie rushed to him, baby in one arm, Caleb in tow. You're bleeding, she said, eyes wide with terror. Just scratched, he muttered. You killed them. I protected my family. The word hung in the air. Family? She looked at him, eyes shimmering. You mean that? He looked at Caleb. At the baby, sleeping safe in her arms. At the woman who had come through fire and birth and fear without breaking. I do. She exhaled, tears slipping quietly down her cheek. Then take us west. Take us to that river town. Let's start over. Somewhere no one knows our names. He nodded slowly, a rare warmth creeping into his tired eyes. We'll go together. He buried the bodies that night. Quietly. Without hatred. By morning, they were riding again, the four of them, tired, wounded, but alive. They reached Salt River by sundown the next day. Ora took them in without question. Helped Elsie heal. Helped the baby grow. Gave them a room, a place to sleep without fear. Wyatt stayed. Day after day. Building a small cabin on the hill just beyond town. Fixing fences. Teaching Caleb to fish. He never once looked back. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden behind the hills, Elsie stepped out onto the porch holding the baby. Caleb ran through the tall grass, chasing fireflies. Wyatt looked up from sharpening a blade. She's strong, Elsie said, watching her daughter. She gets that from her mother. Elsie walked over, placed the baby in his arms. He held her carefully, as if holding something sacred. Thank you, Elsie whispered. For not giving up. For staying. He met her eyes. You saved me too, Elsie. Their hands brushed. And in that small, quiet gesture, everything changed. In the distance, wind rustled the tall grass. The past faded like smoke. And a new life, hard-earned, honest, fragile, began to bloom in the desert. Sometimes salvation comes not with fire or glory, but in a quiet promise kept. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and quiet acts of courage, leave a comment, give it a like, and subscribe for more untold stories of the wild frontier. The months passed quietly in Salt River. Days bled into one another like brushstrokes on a canvas too wide for the eye to hold all at once. Life, though rough-edged and stitched with the threadbare cloth of the past, began to take a shape that resembled peace. Wyatt worked from dawn to dusk. The old pain in his leg flared in colder mornings, but he ignored it. Fencing, roofing, herding, whatever the town needed, he gave his hands to. He still slept with his rifle near the bed. That habit hadn't died. Elsie, too, found rhythm. With Ora's help, she learned how to nurse her daughter properly, how to dry herbs, boil tallow for soap, and stitch bedding from gunny sacks. Her silence lessened, word by word. Laughter returned, quiet at first, like a sparrow too nervous to perch, but it grew stronger. She began to hum while cooking, slow lullabies she hadn't sung since before Caleb was born. The baby, named Clara after Wyatt's mother, never left her side. Elsie carried her in a sling while hanging linens or walking the dusty path to town. Caleb thrived. The boy no longer flinched at loud sounds or shadows. He followed Wyatt everywhere, asking endless questions, trying to walk with a wider stride, like a man. Some nights he fell asleep by the fire, cradling a carved wooden horse Wyatt had whittled for him. The cabin Wyatt had built became more than shelter. It became a home. But the past, no matter how deeply buried, has a cruel way of breathing through the soil. It began with a letter. Ora handed it to Wyatt one morning while Elsie was kneading bread. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight. "It's from Deadman's Bluff," she said. No return. Wyatt opened it, hands calloused and steady. The note inside was written in a tight, careful script. Asterisk, you took something that wasn't yours. You're 3 days' ride from judgment. Come clean, or we'll take it back in blood. Asterisk. There was no signature. Wyatt burned the letter in the stove. He didn't tell Elsie, not then. Not until that night, when the baby had fallen asleep and the stars hung low and sharp through the pine boughs. She was brushing Caleb's hair when Wyatt stepped outside and called softly. "Elsie!" She came to him, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" "They're coming." Her breath caught. "Who?" "I don't know exactly. But someone from your past. Or mine. Or both." She swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "I'll send you to Ora's. You and the children. I'm not leaving you," she said. No tremor. Just quiet conviction. He turned toward her, and for the first time since that cold morning by the burned cabin, he didn't see a victim, he saw a survivor. She stood taller now. Not without fear, but with a resolve deeper than fear. "You may have to," he said. "If it gets bad." She stepped closer. "I was chained and left to die. I gave birth in the dirt. I'm not running again." The wind stirred the pine needles around them. Somewhere an owl called once, twice. He looked into her eyes and saw the truth he tried not to name. "I love you," he said simply. She didn't blink. "I know. I think I've known since the night you wrapped that baby in your coat." He drew her to him, their foreheads touching, silence louder than any vow. They made plans. The next morning, Wyatt rode to Sheriff Kinley's office. The lawman was older, slow to smile, but sharp as broken glass. He owed Wyatt for helping track a pair of cattle thieves weeks prior. "Reckon trouble's coming," Wyatt said. "Don't know how many. Might be here soon." Kinley nodded. "You want deputies?" "No. Just eyes. I'll handle it." "Why?" "Because they're not here for the town. They're here for what I chose to protect." The sheriff leaned back. "Then you better be ready." By dusk the next day, Wyatt had fortified the cabin. Sandbags. Reinforced windows. A hidden revolver beneath the hearthstone. He taught Caleb how to crawl low, quiet, and not to move unless Elsie said so. Elsie practiced loading the rifle. Her hands shook at first. Then steadied. On the third morning they came. 5 riders. Dust clouds marked their approach from the ridge. One flew a crimson kerchief from his saddle horn, the same shade as the one Elsie's stepfather used to tie around his neck. Wyatt stepped out onto the porch. Rifle in hand. Elsie stood beside him. One of the men raised a hand. "You've got something that belongs to us." Wyatt didn't answer. Another spoke. Younger, meaner. "We know what she done. We were promised silver for bringing her back." Elsie didn't flinch. "Then you'll die for silver." The man laughed. "You got fight in you now, girl?" "Wasn't what I remember." Wyatt raised the rifle. "You'll leave. Or you'll bleed." The leader nudged his horse forward. "You ready to die for her, Cowboy?" "I already did," Wyatt said. The shootout erupted without warning. Gunfire cracked through the trees. Wyatt fired first. One man dropped, screaming. Elsie grabbed the second rifle, braced it against the porch beam, and fired again. Caleb screamed inside, but stayed low like he'd been taught. Wyatt rolled behind the chopping block as bullets splintered the porch rail. He fired twice more, another man fell. The leader dismounted, charging with a revolver, but Wyatt met him halfway, tackling him into the dirt. They wrestled, fists wild and dirty. The man reached for a knife, slashed Wyatt across the ribs. Elsie screamed. Wyatt roared and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's temple, once, then again. The man stopped moving. The last two riders hesitated, watched their comrades bleed into the ground, and turned their horses. They didn't look back. It was over in minutes. Wyatt collapsed beside the porch. Blood seeped through his shirt. Elsie rushed to him, falling to her knees. "You're hurt. I'll live." She pressed a cloth to his wound. "You promised." He looked at her through sweat and pain. "And I kept it." That night, they didn't sleep. Ora came to help dress his wounds. Caleb curled beside his sister on a blanket, still and brave. The stars spun silently above the dark pines. A week later, the sheriff rode out to see the cabin. "You'll be all right here?" he asked. Wyatt nodded. "We already are. Folks say you built something out of ashes." "Not me." "She did." The sheriff tipped his hat to Elsie, then rode off into the heat haze. And life, scarred but stubborn, resumed. The past no longer haunted every shadow. The baby learned to laugh. Caleb learned to read. Elsie planted wildflowers outside the door, and Wyatt added a swing to the porch. And every now and then, when the wind blew just right, the desert whispered, not of death, but of survival. Of a girl once chained, now free. Of a boy once broken, now whole. Of a man once wandering, now home. And of the fierce, unyielding love that bound them all. If their story stayed with you, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to hear more forgotten tales from the edges of the American frontier.